The UN headquarters in New York was unusually tense. It was June 3, 2025, the Emergency Assembly on Africa-US Economic Relations. Every seat was filled. Cameras rolled. The world was watching. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso sat quietly in his seat, staring ahead. His eyes didn't blink much, not because he was nervous, but because the weight of centuries sat on his chest. He had been invited last minute, not to speak, just to observe. But everything changed when the U.S. Secretary of State made a remark. African nations must understand that aid is a gift, not an entitlement. Whispers swept through the room like a cold wind. Traoré's jaw tightened. A UN official tried to move on, but Traoré raised his hand. "No one gave us permission to breathe," he said, standing slowly. "I will speak now." At first they tried to shut off his microphone, but the room insisted. Let him speak. And when Traoré took the podium, the world leaned in. What he said next would change history. The camera zoomed in on his face. His voice was calm, yet thunderous. "For decades," he began, "the U.S. has used aid like a leash. Tighten it when we speak up. Loosen it when we bow down." Silence. "You fund hospitals, yes, but only if we vote how you want. You send food, yes, but only if we sign your deals. That's not help. That's control." Gasps rippled through the chamber. "You say you bring democracy, but where were you when our leaders were overthrown? Where were you when our youth were gunned down in streets built by your companies?" People began filming on their phones. Some delegates looked away. Others stared at him, frozen. "You dig our gold, take our oil, strip our forests, then leave us nothing but debt and dirt, and then you call it development aid?" And then came the line that shook the world. "We're not your experiments. We're a continent, not a colony." The hall went silent. The live stream's chat exploded. Flags dropped to half-mast in some African cities. Traoré left the podium. No one clapped. No one could move. Even the air didn't know what to do. Within 6 hours, the clip of Traoré's speech had over 80 million views. "Africa Stands Up" was trending in 37 countries. African youth danced in the streets. Elders cried in their homes. Universities replayed the speech during lectures. It wasn't just a speech, it was a spark that lit something ancient. Meanwhile, in Washington, President Joe Biden was preparing for a press conference on Ukraine. A journalist shouted from the back, "Mr. President, what do you say about Ibrahim Traoré's speech at the UN today?" Biden paused, adjusted his mic. He looked like a man who'd just been hit by something invisible. I wasn't expecting that," he whispered. Reporters glanced at each other. Cameras captured it all. The Guardian headline read, "Africa's Voice Roars. Traoré's Speech Marks Diplomatic Turning Point." CNN called it a political earthquake. But for Traoré, back in his modest hotel room, none of that mattered. He sat alone, in silence, looking at a photo of his mother, a woman who died walking 6 miles to fetch clean water in a country rich with uranium. He wiped a tear, then whispered to himself, "This is for you, Mama." That night, as the world replayed his words, Traoré sat in the dark. No suit, no cameras, just the quiet hum of a fridge in his hotel room. His eyes drifted to the scar on his left arm, a deep one. It wasn't from war. It was from digging trenches during a flood in Burkina Faso when he was just 17. No foreign aid came, no helicopters, just mud, blood, and villagers screaming for help. His best friend, Mamadou, was swept away by the water, and the world never knew. "When we suffer, nobody comes," Traoré whispered to the night. "When we stand, they tell us to sit." Suddenly, his phone lit up. A message from a number he didn't recognize. "You've made powerful enemies. Be careful. He stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. Outside, sirens echoed across Manhattan. Inside, Traoré laid down, one hand on his heart, the other on the floor, as he did in childhood, to feel the pulse of the earth. And that night he dreamed of rivers, of chains breaking, of Mamadou smiling beneath a tree that no longer bled. In Burkina Faso, a little girl named Awa sat on the floor of her classroom, watching Traoré's speech on a dusty projector screen. She was only 9. She didn't know what foreign policy meant, but she understood the tears in her teacher's eyes. "That man, he's like Thomas Sankara," the teacher whispered. After class, Awa ran home barefoot, nearly tearing her school uniform. "Mama," she yelled, "he spoke for us, for all of us." Her mother, a widow who sold roasted peanuts by the roadside, knelt and hugged her. Across the continent, children began reciting his final words. "We're not your experiments. We're a continent, not a colony." They wrote it in notebooks, painted it on broken walls. Some even carved it into the dirt with sticks. Africa hadn't just heard a speech. Africa had heard herself. Meanwhile, in Europe, diplomatic phone lines buzzed non-stop. What will France say? Will China respond? Will the U.S. impose sanctions? But none of that mattered to little Awa, because for the first time in her life she believed, maybe I don't have to be poor forever. And that belief, right there, was revolutionary. In a heavily guarded room in Washington, D.C., 5 senior officials sat in silence. A huge flat screen played Traoré's speech on loop. One of them, a defense analyst, slammed his laptop shut. This wasn't just a speech, it was a warning shot. An older man in a gray suit, former ambassador to Nigeria, sighed. "He's not Sankara. He's smarter. He's quieter. That makes him more dangerous." Another added, "And he's young. He has time, influence, and the whole damn internet." They threw words around like containment, strategy, and diplomatic pressure. But one young black analyst said nothing, until the Secretary of State asked, "You've been quiet, Williams. Thoughts?" He looked up, eyes tired, voice soft. "Maybe, instead of plotting, we should listen." Everyone stared. "You call it a threat. I call it pain. That man lost more than we'll ever understand." The room froze, and somewhere far away, Ibrahim Traoré boarded a small plane headed for Ghana to meet the next African leader ready to rise. The air was tense, but something had begun, something no one could stop. 3 days after the speech, an envelope arrived at the Burkinabe embassy in New York. It wasn't from a diplomat. It was handwritten. From a woman in Detroit. The note was shaky, written in blue ink. It read, "Dear President Traoré, I'm just a mother. My son died in Niger in 2017. He was a U.S. soldier. They told me it was for peace. But now I wonder. I watched your speech. I cried. I don't know why. Maybe because I finally heard someone say the truth. Maybe because I finally realized my son didn't die for peace. He died for oil. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for speaking what mothers like me have been too afraid to say out loud." The envelope had a photo inside. A young white soldier, smiling, holding an African child in one arm, a rifle in the other. Traoré held the photo close. He closed his eyes. "They all suffer," he whispered. "Even their mothers suffer." That night he added a line to his next speech. "When justice speaks, pain doesn't ask about skin color." And the internet? It exploded again. In Liberia, 12-year-old Emmanuel sat by a trash heap near the port. He held a dirty water bottle filled with brown liquid. It was his drinking water. He watched a video on a stranger's phone, Traoré's speech. His mouth parted. "He talks like my grandpa," Emmanuel said. "But my grandpa died." Later that evening, Emmanuel wrote something on the bottle with a black marker. "We're not your experiments." Then he placed it in the ocean. A small wave carried it out. Days later, that same bottle was found by a tourist in Morocco. She posted a photo online. Within 24 hours, it had 1.2 million likes. People began writing that phrase everywhere. In subways, on signs, in music, on murals. "We're not your experiments." And Emmanuel, he got sick days later. But when a visiting NGO worker heard his story, they flew him to Ghana for treatment. He survived. And when he woke up in the hospital, he saw a man standing by the door. It was Ibrahim Traoré. He knelt, held Emmanuel's hand and said, "You wrote truth on a bottle. That's more powerful than a billion-dollar speech." In a gold-lit chamber inside the Élysée Palace, the French president leaned back in his chair. He had just watched Traoré's speech for the third time. An aide stood by, nervous. "Sir, shall we respond?" The president frowned. "Respond to what? A ghost? A boy with no army, no nukes, no lobby?" Another aide stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, he's not a ghost. He's a storm." Silence. The president picked up his secure phone and dialed. A few rings. A voice answered from a quiet office in Brussels. "You saw it?" he asked. "Yes," the other man replied. "The people love him. It's dangerous." "Dangerous?" The French president scoffed. "He's just one man." "So was Mandela." A pause. "So was Sankara." He hung up, walked to the window, stared at the Eiffel Tower. It looked different tonight. Weaker, smaller. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré sat with a group of village elders. They were not diplomats. They were farmers, women, teachers. One old man leaned in and said, "Don't let the fire go out, son. The ancestors are watching." And for the first time in days, Traoré smiled. But the storm was only beginning. In Baltimore, 17-year-old Kayla Jefferson sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her laptop. She was African American, smart, quiet. Her father worked 2 jobs. Her mother had lupus, and until last week, she'd never heard of Ibrahim Traoré. But now, she couldn't stop watching his speech. His words wrapped around her heart like a fire she didn't know she needed. "We're not your experiments." She whispered it under her breath. That night, she stayed up designing a poster. It had Traoré's face in black and white, with bright red letters. "Africa stands up, so do I." She took it to school the next morning, and when a teacher told her to take it down, she stood taller. "No," she said. "You teach history, but this is history." Her classmates started clapping. A video went viral. A teenage black girl in America refusing to sit down, echoing a voice from a continent she'd never touched. Later, her mother hugged her and said, "Maybe your roots are waking up, baby." And in Ouagadougou, when Traoré saw that clip, he whispered, "The children, they are becoming warriors." Traoré returned to Burkina Faso under heavy security. But there was something heavier than the guards. A silence between him and his childhood friend, Commander Issoufou. They had grown up like brothers, shared rice, water, even grief. But lately, Issoufou had been cold. One night, as the two sat beneath a mango tree, Traoré asked softly, "Why don't you speak anymore?" Issoufou avoided his eyes. "They offered me a deal," he said. Traoré's breath caught. "Who?" "A foreign diplomat. If I get you to step down quietly, I get a home in Paris, a future." Traoré didn't move, didn't shout, just closed his eyes. "So, you'd trade your brother for a couch in someone else's empire?" Issoufou looked ashamed but said nothing. Traoré stood up. "I won't arrest you, but I'll never trust you again." And as he walked away, something in his heart cracked. Not because of betrayal, but because every time a brother chose comfort over courage, another chain around Africa's neck stayed locked. And he knew there would be more chains to fight. In Nigeria, thousands marched with painted faces. In Senegal, musicians filled the streets with drums and chants of Traoré. But in D.C., it rained. And in that rain, a lone African janitor named Papa Yao pushed his mop across the marble floor of the World Bank. He paused when a CNN headline flashed on a lobby screen. Africa's young lion, Ibrahim Traoré, sparks global movement. Papa Yao dropped the mop. He leaned on the handle and cried. A white intern nearby asked, "Are you okay, sir?" Papa Yao nodded, then whispered in broken English, "He speak for me, my country, my father, my pain." The intern didn't understand, but she stood silently as the old man wept into the mop bucket. Outside, the rain poured harder. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré stood in a garden, watering flowers his late mother once planted. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "Mama, they're listening now. The world is listening." But deep down he also knew, when the world starts to listen, those in power start to panic. And somewhere, in a dark room far away, someone had just signed his name on a kill list. It was Independence Day in Burkina Faso. The crowd was electric, flags everywhere, drums beating like thunder. President Traoré stood tall on stage, waving to the people. But 200 meters away, hidden inside a vendor's stall, a man kneeled with a sniper rifle. He wasn't Burkinabe. His passport was fake. His orders were clear. End the speech. End the man. He had one shot, the scope locked onto Traoré's chest. He whispered, "Forgive me, Africa," then pulled the trigger. Pop! Screams. Traoré staggered backward. Chaos erupted. Security pulled him down. Blood spilled, but not his. A 10-year-old boy had seen the rifle glint from the crowd. He ran forward, screaming, pointing. A soldier turned just in time and threw himself in front of Traoré. The bullet hit the soldier's neck. He died instantly. His name? Private Yakuba Diallo, age 19. His last words as he bled out, "Don't let the president fall. Africa needs him." That clip, raw and shaking, was shared 72 million times in 24 hours. And for the first time in decades, CNN ran this headline: "African blood protects African hope." Yakuba's mother was inconsolable. At his funeral, she didn't cry, she screamed, "You promised you'd just guard the road. You lied. You lied." Traoré stood beside her, shaking. He knelt in the red dust and placed his own jacket over the boy's casket. Then he whispered to the mother, "I swear to you, your son did not die for nothing. He protected more than a man. He protected a future." He stood, wiped his tears, and faced the press. This was not a robbery. This was not a random act. This was a message, to all of us, to sit down and shut up. He paused. But we will not. To whoever sent that bullet, hear me now. Africa has no mute button. That night, protest fires burned outside U.S. embassies in Accra, Nairobi, Kampala, and Harare. People held up signs with Yakuba's name. Some carved it into their arms. In Washington, a protester held a massive poster of Traoré with the words, "We finally found our voice." And you tried to shoot it. And still, the president of Burkina Faso refused to go into hiding. "If I vanish now," he said, "Africa vanishes with me." Across the continent, the story of Traoré and the fallen soldier reached even the most silent corners. In rural Malawi, there lived a mute boy named Blessings, age 8. He had never spoken a word in his life. His parents thought he was cursed. Doctors gave up. But one morning, as chickens clucked outside and his father played Traoré's funeral speech on a cracked radio, Blessings stood up. His lips trembled. He gripped his chest. And in a raspy, broken voice he had never used, he said, "The man did not die." His mother dropped the bowl in her hands. He spoke again, louder. The man did not die. He is in all of us. His voice was shaky, like a wind finding its way through the trees, but it was real. They recorded it, shared it. When Traoré heard the clip, he cried for the third time in public. He sent a plane for the boy and his family. When they met, blessings ran into his arms, no fear, and all the cameras captured Traoré saying, "You're proof, my son, that the voice of Africa cannot be silenced. It only waits for the right moment to speak." 3 months after the assassination attempt, world leaders gathered in Geneva for an emergency global summit. The goal, redefining Africa-US economic relations. Traoré arrived in a simple black suit. No entourage, no smile. Inside the grand hall, the air was stiff. The U.S. Secretary of State sat with a frozen face. France's delegate whispered nervously. Even China's ambassador glanced down. Then Traoré stood. No notes, no teleprompter, just truth. You give us loans that shackle. You build roads that lead to your mining fields. You send soldiers, not teachers. And you call it help. He looked straight at the American delegate. You don't fear Africa's poverty. You fear our potential. Then slowly he placed a small, blood-stained Burkinabe flag on the podium. This is Yakuba's flag. He died because someone feared what I might say today, but I say it anyway. Silence. Then, from the back, someone began to clap. 1, then 5, then the whole room. Even leaders who once looked away now looked at him, with respect. And somewhere in Washington, a retired senator whispered on live TV, "We just witnessed the rise of the next Mandela." Back in Ouagadougou, a letter appeared online, written by Traoré, handwritten, no logo, no seal. It began simply, "To every child born in Africa, and to every child born elsewhere, whose heart beats for justice." He wrote of stolen futures, forced silence and broken promises, of how Africa's gold, Africa's oil, Africa's children were treated as currency. But then he changed tone. "I forgive those who feared us. Fear blinds, but courage heals. To the leaders of the West, you are not my enemy. But if you continue to ignore our voice, history will become your enemy. I want partnership, not puppetry." The letter was translated into 42 languages. Children read it in schools. Churches printed it in bulletins. An artist in Brazil painted it across a favela wall. One line was quoted in parliaments from South Africa to Sweden. "We're not your experiments. We're a continent, not a colony." That sentence alone made over 8 million people change their social media bios to "Africa stands up." And somewhere, in a small prison in Sierra Leone, a forgotten political prisoner cried and whispered, "He's saying what we died trying to say." The skies over Burkina Faso were clear that night. No jets, no drones, no sound, just stars. Thousands gathered in the capital. Some came from villages, walking for days. They carried candles, wore white. Traoré stood at the National Monument. He didn't speak from a podium. He stood among them, shoulder to shoulder, one of them. Then quietly he said, "This isn't about me anymore. It's about all of us, standing." The crowd began to hum, soft, low, like the earth was singing. From the crowd, a woman began to chant the names of every African country, and others joined, loud, united. Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Ghana, Dr. Congo, Somalia, Zambia, Ethiopia, Senegal. And then, total silence. Someone pointed up. Hundreds of drones lit up the sky. They formed one word, Africa, and beneath it the words, "We are no longer afraid." Traoré looked up. A tear fell down his cheek. Then he turned to the crowd. "Our pain has roots, but so does our power. And tonight, the world finally saw both. Now, it's your turn. If this story moved you, made you cry, made you proud, made you think, please do one thing for Africa, for truth, for tomorrow. Click that subscribe button, like this video right now, and drop a comment telling us what part made you cry the most. Together, let's make the algorithm hear what colonizers never wanted to hear. Africa stands up, and you're standing with us. We'll see you in the next story. One continent, one voice, one future.